my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. So today we look at how our church is rethinking our organizational structure. Now I know for some of you that sounds about as exciting as going out and shoveling snow one more time. But folks, we're talking new wine here. We're talking a banquet, a celebration, a rethinking of how best to be the church in the 21st century, how best to serve our community and our world. Yes, we've been on this journey since 1652 here at First Congregational Church of Norwalk. That's actually our official name. Now that's a lot of old wine since 1652. But remember, old wine can be really good. Am I wrong? Today we use a banquet and a parable to get us to think about what's ahead for us as a church. Paul Newsome wrote a very profound book years ago that I've mentioned the title before here in church, and it was entitled, I Refuse to Lead a Dying Church. In that book, Newsome says that the church needs to make 6 choices, or at least a few of them. And here they are. Choosing life over death. Choosing community over isolation. Choosing fun over drudgery. Choosing bold over mild. Choosing frontier over fortress. Choosing now rather than later. Now, as you see, our church is doing pretty darn good in some of those choices, are we not? So go ahead, take a moment and pat yourself on the back. But what does all this have to do with wine and banquets? In the text today, we see the gathering that Jesus attends at Levi's house. It's the first of many scenes in the Gospel of Luke that take place around the table or in the context of a meal. So another question I guess we could add to our list is, are we choosing to make sure that our tables are always open? Now this meal at Levi's house is in fact a banquet, and it's quite lavish. And then comes that question from the Pharisees about why Jesus' disciples do not fast like John's disciples did. They weren't just worried simply about Jesus eating with outcasts. They were also downright upset that Jesus and his disciples were having so much fun. And then Jesus brings the whole family image into play, talking about bridegrooms and brides, and implying that this new family is being formed. Jesus is holding up for us in this parable newness in relationship with God, newness with regard to one another, newness in regard to our spiritual practice. You could even say that this idea that new wine would burst old wineskins kind of implies at least some regard for maintaining the integrity of both the old and the new. After all, as far as our church structure goes, let's face it, it's stood the test of time, has it not? 1652. We've pretty much been organized the same way since then. It's worked, but a time for new wine is upon us. Remember, this is a parable, Don't put new wine into old wineskins. Parables are meant to startle, to stir up our thinking. So maybe the old in this parable represents the kind of religious conventionalities that narrow our perspective. The new is not just the unprecedented or whatever is novel at the time. New clothing for the baptized represents new life. You see, the old tradition, we don't still do this. Some churches actually do. The old tradition in the early church was when you got baptized, and of course, they didn't sprinkle back then, they went all the way under. When you got baptized, you also put on new clothes, outfit of white. So we start the text then with Jesus and his followers coming across to the religious people as a bunch of party animals, basically. Jesus is letting this new message get out that when you're with family, when you're at a wedding, the meal is festive, it's new. It's a new opportunity. It's a new opportunity to choose community over isolation, fun over drudgery, bold over mild. And there's probably no bigger theme that I've had since I've been the pastor of this church than that. Community over isolation. It's almost a weekly topic, let's face it. We have to keep reminding ourselves of this new kingdom and how festive and wonderful it is. Community over isolation. So maybe we just have a little problem then of just not being flexible. I know I often, like you, probably fall into the trap of always wanting the predictable. And of course, in this church, you rarely ever get it, let's face it. We love to hang on to the tried and true, do we not? But may we let this parable help us to see that we just cannot keep pouring new wine into old wineskins, because we know that the gases from the new wine make the old wineskins expand and crack, and then we lose all the newness in the process. So just maybe all this new needs a new container, so to speak. In a sense, this sermon is a lead-in to the process of looking at creating new structures for our church that will hold all this new wine that we've got around here. But I'm sure we know that any parable may have many meanings. So what about our lives, our individual lives? After all, this is the Lenten season, a time of examination of our lives, institutions, how we best let the gospel into our community and our world. If we want this new wine in our lives, we must realize that this new wine of Jesus the Christ is too dynamic to be contained by boxing it in. That's what he was trying to get across that day to that audience. This is new. It's dynamic. Don't try to put it in the old boxes. I know some of you prefer that boxed wine, but really, we're being called on by Jesus to be fluid, to be expandable, to be creative, because things have changed since 1652. So may we join today with Paul Nixon. Choose today, choose tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and next month and next year. May we continue to choose community over isolation, fun over drudgery, bold over mild, frontier over fortress. and now rather than later. Let the new wine flow. Bring your containers. Bring them to the parish hall as we continue worship. Just make sure that those containers are new. Community over isolation. This sounds like a party to me. It sounds like it could get rowdy and out of hand, which it already has. After the doxology, come to the parish hall with those new containers, and we will continue the worship in the parish hall with conversation around the table as we begin to think about the future of our church. So, new wine, but make sure you pour it into some new wineskins. Amen?